First of all, shout out to Sune, the TIR moderator, and Dusty, the moderators, for holding down the fort as Kuba and I were a little tardy to the party as we were having a quote-unquote backstage conversation. Hello, good morning to most, good afternoon to others. I am your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution podcast. We're doing a special episode, and I'm trying to move away from the pre-records and do more things live. While this is an early morning episode, we will be back again at our regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific tonight, where I'll be speaking with Professor Alexander Herbert as he has an update for us in his Lenin in 45 volume series. Also, if you dig the listener-supported programming we have here on TIR, think about becoming a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can make sure that TIR can continue this breakneck pace of shows. Now, on to the topic at hand, the new front, Israel versus Iran, and the echoes of empire. Friday the 13th has always had a dark aura in Western lore. But for the people of Iran, this one was a literal nightmare. Israeli warplanes began pounding Iranian military targets, igniting what some fear could spiral into a region-wide or even global conflict. For decades, Iran has been cast as a rogue state by the West, a nuclear boogeyman in waiting. But the reality on the ground tells a different story. Tehran's military is outdated, constrained by decades of sanctions. Their air force, a fleet of aging American planes from before the Islamic Revolution. Meanwhile, Israel is among the most advanced in the world, bolstered by cutting-edge U.S. tech and an undisclosed nuclear arsenal. Now, after years of shadow conflict, the bombs are no longer just whispers in the night. They're lighting up the skies over both countries. Is this the opening act of World War III? Is the U.S., under the returning shadow of Donald Trump, positioned to de-escalate or escalate this crisis? Will the man who branded himself the master of deals finally broker peace, or will he let Israel continue to play the abusive partner who unleashes violence only to blame the victim, muttering, "Look what you made me do"? Here to discuss this with me is my man in the middle of all the geopolitical nonsense, Deep State Kuba.
Shalom and or salam, people.
How are you this evening day?
Evening day is about right. The empties should tell the whole story. I'm in my comfort and emotional security bunker, trying to keep out the bad news. But I have to say, I think that Israelis may have emotional safety bunker busting technology.
Now, is anyone where you are talking about this as an unprovoked attack? Russia attacking the Ukraine was quote unquote unprovoked in Western media. This is a preemptive strike by Benjamin Netanyahu, but Iran has been the preemptive bad guy, it feels like, for decades.
Well, in Europe, across all of Europe, as in the United States, you have a sharp division between the transatlantic sort of legacy elite and the more popular media outlets, and the kind of voice of the Euro street that comes out through social media and activism.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have a very strong pro-Palestinian movement all across Europe. Pro-Palestinian demonstrations are really a weekly affair in most major European countries. Even smaller cities will have some rallies, yes. And pro-Palestinian graffiti is commonplace.
Okay.
Enough so that it's basically trivial, right? And as a result, there are a lot of people who see this as another example of unilateral Israeli escalation and aggression against a country which might not be the democratic poster child of the Middle East, or the miscongeniality in the UN human rights pageant, but nonetheless did nothing to provoke this. Even their previous responses to Israeli attacks have been relatively measured and muted, compared even to the expectations of Western analysts. So it's hard to find anyone with, outside of official government outlets, world national leaders, that takes even the relatively tame line of, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, right? No elaboration. But that is the official line coming out of Germany, coming out of France, coming out of Canada as well, that this is somehow connected through the alleged nuclear weapons program in Iran. The Iranians deny that they're interested in nuclear weapons technology. There are international observers, including UN agencies, that say that there is no active Iranian weapons program. So take that as you will, right? According to Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel has been months, not years, away from a nuclear bomb for the last 15 years, and somehow they never get one. So I wouldn't necessarily take the Israelis at their word on this. And just to clarify, what Netanyahu claims, you correctly described his claim that this was a preemptive strike. And preemptive strikes, which are a type of first strike, are legal according to the quaint norms of the Geneva Convention and international law. But there are certain requirements. You can't just sucker punch your neighbor because you feel like it. If there's a demonstrable concentration of forces, mobilization, if you hit them because they are obviously and clearly preparing to hit you, that's preemptive, and that is legal. Preventative strikes, I think that this is what would be described as a preventative strike, which are not legal. And that category didn't even exist until George W. Bush invented it to justify the Iraq War. That's a strike which hits target a rival country, in his case Iraq, in order to eliminate the potential down the road of one day there being aggression. And again, although that was presented by George W. Bush and American officialdom as a justification, not actually legal according to international law. According to international law, that's just aggression. That's starting a war, right? There's no justification for it.
Donald Trump was questioned on his plane, and he talks as if this is just a real estate deal or maybe one of his many failed business transactions. There was a deal on the table. They didn't take the deal. We had a deal. It was a great deal. It was a very good deal. It was packaged nicely.
It was the greatest deal.
It was the greatest deal.
It was a 10, like my daughter Ivanka, like the greatest. You could totally take that deal to Epstein Island. Even Epstein wouldn't turn down that deal when it turned 16.
But I have a serious question for you, and I don't want to make this too much about Donald Trump. But he does not want a war on his hands because he knows that you can't really wash that off. And this presidency has been, in my opinion, a pretty massive failure for him. He's gotten some things done that he wanted to do. His relationship with Musk has been severed. The pushback on these ICE raids to me is worse than kids in cages. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
There's really nothing, even his own base is really supporting. Where are all the jobs? And eggs are still expensive in your country.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the one thing he could do? Is he going to try to broker some sort of peace deal?
So I think that he may have been talked into greenlighting this strike with the argument that, look, the Iranians are being intransigent. They're not agreeing to the terms that you have so generously bestowed on them. We need to teach them a lesson, like a short, sharp hit, right? Like hitting a dog on the nose with a rolled up newspaper will teach them their place and assert that you're the alpha, you're the guy. I think that that's an argument which would naturally appeal to him. I think it's also an argument that's simple and aggressive enough for it to make sense to him, which is an important consideration. And the Israelis know him well enough to pitch that kind of manipulation. So I think that he may believe that the road to peace goes through bombed out Iran. I don't think that's the case. I think that the Iranians are going to, it's possible that he'll be able to secure some kind of truce because they have been reeling. It's not just these recent attacks, but Hezbollah and Hamas were extremely valuable proxies of theirs. Hezbollah has been wiped out. They lost Assad as well, their key ally in the region. So what they have is basically the largest minority stake in Iraq and the Houthis. That's who's left on the axis of resistance, so-called. Now, the core infrastructure in Iran has just been shredded, the top cut off. So they could use a breather. But Trump has demonstrated that the United States is, to borrow a Russian term, agreement incapable. Even if you sign a deal, even if you do a deal with the United States, like they did with Obama, then there's no rational expectation that they'll hold on to it, right? Any deal with the United States is immediately meaningless. So you have to prepare for them to break the next deal, which means that you have to anticipate that at some point it'll be a shooting war. The United States will need to be cut down. I'm not saying that's desirable. I'm saying that that's a very rational interpretation of recent events from the perspective of American adversaries. What's also true is that I think that it'll be obvious to the remaining Iranian leadership that the only path towards national security is through the development of nuclear weapons. Right? The countries that the United States has not attempted to regime change and decapitate in this way, well, North Korea is the poster boy for the useful benefits of proliferation. Similarly, Pakistan has been a trouble spot in a very strategic region of the sort of crossroads between South Asia and the Middle East, gateway to Afghanistan. There's all kinds of American meddling, but it's never been regime changed. And likewise, that may have to do with the fact that they also have a nuclear arsenal. Now, when it comes to Trump's calculations, in a way, I think that he's kind of in a no-lose situation with this escalation. If it works like the Israelis promised, and he manages to cow Iran to such an extent that they're forced to sign some kind of deal that allows Trump to claim victory, well, then he's brought peace to the Middle East through a victorious war. Nothing better if you're an American president.
Mm.
If that doesn't happen, and the Iranians instead retaliate, and don't just retaliate against Israel, but strike American targets, either as their own form of retaliation. After all, despite even the official statements issued by Trump have been very confused about whether or not the United States participated in this strike, to what extent they participated in the strike, whether they approved the strike, whether the negotiations that were ongoing when the strike happened. And remember, one of the leadership figures killed through targeted bombings was the actual lead negotiator on the Iranian side. So you're killing the people you're talking to. That there's some indication that Trump knew that this was coming, and that the negotiations were a bad faith effort to get the Iranians to underestimate the likelihood of an immediate strike. So it would not be outlandish for the Iranians to treat the United States as a party to the attacks and to retaliate against American assets in the region. And there are all kinds. There's no shortage of bases. There's tens of thousands of American troops in the Persian Gulf alone, in Turkey as well. And many of the bases that house these troops don't have the same kind of layered air defense systems that the Israelis have with their Iron Dome technology and add-ons over the core country. They're also, in the case of a place like Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, much closer to Iran. So the warning time of ballistic missile or drone attack would be much shorter. So you could potentially wipe out most of an installation, maybe kill 1,000 U.S. soldiers, maybe sink some very substantial U.S. naval assets as well. The kind of attack that would require some form of American reprisal, and then we're off to the races, right? Then, like you said, it becomes at least a regional conflict. Now, in that case, Trump doesn't get peace in the Middle East. But what he does have is an actual war, which permits actual war powers for a sitting president. One way to get out of the malaise that he's in right now politically, as you pointed out, the price of eggs is still high.
Mm-hmm.
Tariffs were extraordinarily unpopular, and the policies muddy and messy. People don't understand what the next few months are going to bring for their businesses, for their jobs. The employment is very, very tenuous. You have the Musk humiliation and blow up, right? It's been a very mixed bag, this dynamic activist period for Trump. And he either needs to pull a win so that he's popular enough to keep on going inside the whatever remaining structures of democratic constitutionalism have made it this far, or he needs a crisis serious enough so that he can, in a way that will be palatable to enough of the security establishment, invoke authoritarian powers, martial law. We've already seen him send out the National Guard for domestic.
For nothing, yeah.
For nothing, exactly. So if the country is actually at war with Iran, he can send out the National Guard for, because the pro-Palestinian activists are actually treasonously colluding with America's enemies. This is undermining the war effort, et cetera, et cetera. So in that eventuality, he also gets something that he wants, which I think is it's something that should put us all on edge, because the likelihood of authoritarian intensification, I think, has always been there. I didn't quite understand. I couldn't quite anticipate what specific catalyst there'd be for the next level of authoritarian escalation. I thought that it might be a sort of fake war over Panama or Greenland, something that's safer because it's more constrained. But a real war with Iran is even better for those purposes.
Well, let's bring in another person that has some words to say about this whole thing. I think he wrote some words for Jacobin. He is my neighbor and very good friend. Please welcome host of Give Them an Argument, Ben Burgis.
What's
up? How are you?
I am all right. Yeah, I thought when we were talking about the stream, I thought I was not going to be here, but I actually just finished writing an article about this, and I was like, "Oh, the stream's going to be going on. You know, it's not like I'm leaving in the next 10 minutes anyway. Should come by and say hi."
Well, let me ask you this. Is this the official start of a regional war or just another high-profile escalation? What's the difference? What's different now than in previous Israel-Iran tensions, in your opinion, Ben?
Well, I mean, what's different now is that there are, is that Israel has, Israel hasn't just sort of sneakily assassinated someone with plausible deniability or things like that. I mean, they've just been laying absolute waste to Iran. These are giant strikes. I mean, it's certainly different now that there are Iranian ballistic missiles that have hit Israel, which, by the way, I mean, this is the thing I was writing the article about just now, has led many Israeli officials and many of Israel's supporters in the West to rediscover the principle that it's bad to drop bombs that are going to kill lots of civilians, which I have many questions about.
Well, I saw, and I don't know if the numbers have changed. You guys might be a little bit more up on this than me. It was about 10 Israelis have been killed in Iranian counterstrikes.
The number I keep seeing is 24, like, civilians. I think there might be more military, but it's certainly not very much more. It's not like. I don't think Iran has. I mean, they're doing their best, right? But I mean, I don't think Iran has the capacity, at least given anything they're willing to do right now, to get those numbers too far up right now.
And I'll direct this to Kuba, and then you can fire back, Ben. Why is Iran the big bad in this region, and everyone's afraid of what they can do? And it is sanctions that has prevented them from really growing out any sort of military of substance. What is it about Iran that puts so much fear into the West?
The Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution.
That was almost 50 years ago.
Yes, but it created for the first time a modern, anti-imperial, anti-Western Islamic state, if you pardon the expression, that could speak for the Shia minority of Muslims and use that religious identity as a mobilizing principle to consolidate and coordinate to strike against Western interests and the state of Israel. And that's what they've been doing. If you look at their relationship with Assad, their relationship with Hezbollah, their relationship with the Houthis. And not only that, but the Sunni dictatorships of the Middle East, places like Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, all have substantial Shia minorities, or in some cases, outright majorities, as in Bahrain and Iraq. Nonetheless, they had pro-Western aligned Sunni dictators. So an activist, aggressive, anti-imperialist government of a major country, right? We're not talking about Syria, which at best was a middle power in the region. Iran is one of the largest countries in the Middle East, substantial economic resources and reserves, very highly educated population, incredible potential right there. To have this country in the hands of religious leaders that through a successful Islamic revolution have a great deal of legitimacy in the Shia activist world, trying to orchestrate and coordinate all of the anti-Western resistance among these various groups in the region. That was a significant threat, the greatest threat beyond the communist left, communist Soviet-aligned left, to these pro-Western regimes and to Western interests. So that big bad designation, which a different government might have opted to normalize away, because especially after September 11th, there was a moment when Iran could have, like Russia, post-Soviet Russia, or other states at the time, been talked down from this aggressive mobilization of violent revolutionary groups to just kind of being a spoiler vote at the UN. But Dick Cheney was in charge and he was having none of that. So instead,
although it is really striking. I mean, nobody seems to remember this, but like after, when the U.S. first went into Afghanistan, I mean, like Iran let the U.S. use their airspace, for that, right? I mean, like that's because they hated the Taliban, they were just as happy to see them taken out, right? So I mean, it is, I mean, which just is just reinforcing your point that I mean, like that this was ideological, that that they were like right from the get-go, they were put on the axis of evil list. When that's obviously not the only approach that could have been taken.
Yeah, precisely. But there are memories long enough. Maybe it could be said that the United States forgets, but it never forgives, right? If you nationalize American corporate assets, if you overthrow a pro-American regime, then the state that follows is going to have a real tough time trying to reestablish a normal diplomatic relationship. I think that Vietnam only normalized its relationship with the United States in the 90s, I think. And only because of the strategic necessity of finding regional partners to counterbalance the People's Republic of China. So the origin, right? I hate to invoke Ibram X. Kendi, but they were branded from the start.
Never thought we'd get a Kendi quote on this show.
Yeah, the proven Kendi quote at that.
Yeah, in proper
context. I mean, I guess you did read Anti-Racist Baby on the show once.
I did. I did read Anti-Racist Baby in a champagne room in, I think, like 2020 or something like that. Do you remember that, Kuba?
Oh, yes. I thought your edition went great, and the fact that they picked Terrence Stamp to do the audiobook is outrageous.
Yeah.
That, by the way.
Iran must have baby books like that, right? I kind of want to read that, the Islamic Revolutionary Baby.
They're too depressing for an American audience, I'm afraid.
Fair enough. I mean,
yeah. If you guys want to see that clip, it's me Bajlan, Kuba, and Pascal. And Pascal started beatboxing while I read Anti-Racist Baby because it does rhyme. So,
although in a really bad way, right? Like in the laziest possible. I know what rhyme schemes are, but not what meter is. I've learned rhythm from Englishman type of thing.
Like those Mary Poppins kind, not like.
So if it's okay, I did just want to say, like, the biggest thing I was thinking about when Cooper was like laying out the history of like why Iran is the big bad, for the U.S., the Middle East, is if you like really think about the details of that history, that really shows you. I mean, I guess it's a very basic point, but I think it's worth making. Like, just how fucking insane it is that the official rationale for everything that's going on right now is that it would be completely unacceptable for Iran to get a nuclear weapon. I mean, put aside the fact that Netanyahu has said once every 6 weeks since the 1990s that Iran was 5 minutes away from getting a nuke. And, so to believe that this was like really an urgent thing, you would have to accept that this time he was telling the truth. And man, the timing sucks. Just when they were doing like diplomatic negotiations for like a new nuclear deal. But they were 5 minutes away. We had to do it right at this exact moment, right? So putting aside all of that, putting aside the fact that Trump's own director of national security, director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said in the official national intelligence assessment just a few months ago that Iran hadn't even decided to pursue developing a nuke. Like, just like, except for the sake of argument that Iraq was developing this, except for the sake of argument, they were 5 minutes away from having a nuke. Okay, and right? I mean, if you look at the actual history of Iran in that almost 50 years since the Islamic Revolution, and you can, like, this is not to say that it's not a bad regime that hasn't done lots of bad things. It is, and it has, but like, just cold-eyed, sober assessment of this, look, they've certainly been interested in acting as a regional counterweight to the U.S. and Israel, and taking a posture where they will pick certain kinds of fights in certain kinds of ways, certainly in terms of arming and supporting various other actors around the region, who are involved in different kinds of conflicts. But they have been so incredibly cautious and conservative about using their own military.
mm-hmm.
I mean, in general, right? I mean, this is, not only Iran has not started any war, with certainly if we're going to apply the same standards that people use to say Trump did start any new wars, right? Like, that standard for what counts as like a full-fledged war. Iran hasn't started any wars with anybody.
And they're always catching strays.
Exactly.
Catching strays. They caught strays during the first Trump go-round.
So looking at what happened during the first Trump assassinated an Iranian general, openly, and they, they were so like the Iranian response to that was so fucking restrained because the last thing they wanted was a full-blown war. They look at what happened when the previous time, right? That Israel, last year, right? They'd attacked Iran, and Iran was like, oh no, we have to retaliate, right? We're gonna lose too much face if we don't retaliate at all. But just so you know, we're about to send our slowest drones in the next 3 days. Yeah. Right? Like, it's so restrained. And again, they're so cautious about using, directly being involved in conflicts with their own military. And so just the premise of all of this, Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuke stuff, is so insane, because it's like, wait a second. So what you're saying is that the second Iran got a nuke, they would commit national suicide. Right? It's like, what on earth in this track record makes you think they would do that?
Kuba?
I agree that the Iranians have been very restrained in terms of escalation, retaliation. In some ways, they've played a long game like the Soviets during the Cold War, a war of position. They assumed time was on their side, and they would flip countries like Syria. They would use Hezbollah to push their influence in Lebanon. When they saw opportunities, they would back groups like the Houthis. They supported Hamas as well in the West Bank. So they had a cautious approach of using proxies to extend their reach and their influence. They tried to avoid direct confrontations with the United States. There was a period of time when there was some Iranian terrorism that against American forces, Western targets. I think the Beirut bombing in the 80s when Reagan was in charge, that was Hezbollah, and that was coordinated with the Iranians. They kept American CIA operatives and diplomats hostages for a very long time after the revolution, those kinds of things. But that period was intense at the beginning, and it has petered off over time. And one other element that I really feel we should bring in is the Iran-Iraq War. The revolution was such a threat to the regional order and to the Sunni monarchies and dictatorships in the region that Saddam Hussein preemptively invades Iran in order to try to topple the new Shia government and create a regime change in a favorable direction. He gets support from all of the Gulf states, bottomless money, and weapons being just funneled through whatever channel the Americans could possibly organize to so that he had the means to continue pushing against Iran, which is a much larger country. And it was an incredibly bloody and costly conflict right at the start of the existence of the Islamic Republic. So that also stamped at the beginning, established a very hostile regional order between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Sunni dictatorships and monarchies of the pro-US Middle East. They all felt that Iran represented an existential threat. And the Iranian political elite certainly cultivated an image that they wanted to, one day they would get Mecca, one day they would get rid of the Saudi royal family, one day the Shia would be free, and the border in the Middle East would be inverted with Shia groups at the top and Iran as the dominant force. Now, to get back to the question of nuclear weapons and proliferation, I remember it being the end of the world if North Korea got nuclear weapons. I remember it being the end of the world if Pakistan got nuclear weapons. I remember it being the end of the world if India got nuclear weapons. And it turns out that the world could accommodate to all of those realities, that all of those governments, including North Korea, which structurally and based on past behavior is a lot more chaotic and a lot more idiosyncratic, right? A lot more one-man authoritarian, and that guy is crazy, than the Islamic Republic of Iran. They haven't launched any nuclear terrorism. They have no first strikes against Seoul. They've used their nuclear weapons, even this most extreme of regimes, in the way that you would expect a rational regime to use them, as a deterrent for their own safety. So it seems as though it is true that for states that have a very strong interest in regime change in Iran, yeah, you can't let the Iranians get a nuclear weapon because then you can't do the regime change. But for everybody who's more regime change neutral, would it be so bad? Would it be the end of the world? What? Like, explain. It feels like you've got some more explaining to do. I want to see your math.
What would need to happen for NATO, Russia, or China to get involved? And how does this conflict fit into the broader global realignment?
So, what would,
especially with Russia dealing with their own situation with Ukraine, do they have, for example, planes? I said that in the opening. I think Iran has something like 54, and they're all old, like Top Gun. They have MiGs.
like, they're still around. There's new MiGs being made, but point taken.
No, not the ones they have. Yeah, they're riding around like vintage.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember
the MiG Gremlin.
The bad guys in the new Top Gun movie, they were incredibly vague about where it was, but it seemed to be some like weird sort of Iran-like country, but also
Iran-Stan.
That also had incredibly sophisticated weapons.
The Northern Irakistan Freedom Force. That was the first country I made up on accident, trying to say Northern Syria instead of Irakistan.
Mind you, right? Like, I'm surprised that no one at the State Department didn't choose to like run with that. And Irakistan. Wait, I think I can work with that. Is Ahmed Chalabi still around?
The Irakistani insurgents have bunkered down in Turkey and are taking over. So we need to get the Kurds.
But to your point, like, what would it take for these other powers to get involved? NATO isn't going to do anything. The turmoil between American policy and the American pivot away from Europe, there have been declassified documents, leaked documents, leaked Pentagon strategy papers, indicating that in case of a two-front war, Pete Hegseth's Department of Defense is just going to abandon Europe. So not only that, but between the threats against Canada and the threats against Greenland, right? Like, the call is coming from inside the house as far as many NATO powers are concerned. So trying to get some kind of NATO response when not a single member has been threatened. Israel is not a NATO ally. It is a U.S. ally, but it is not a member of NATO. It does not have any of those treaty rights or obligations. So NATO is out. That's just not going to happen. Russia has already been trading technology and resources with Iran. So it's probably at the limit of how it can participate. The pressure that it faces in Ukraine, that war is kind of going in Russia's favor in the sense that they're the ones advancing and not the Ukrainians, but it is such a slow, destructive grind that they don't have a great deal of bandwidth socially, economically, or militarily to go on an expedition in a Middle East that is more dangerous than ever, right? They had to give up their position in Syria until the Israelis forced the new government to let them back in. China is the most likely force for intervention, except that its interests are in stability, and especially stability in the oil-producing areas of the Persian Gulf and in, ironically, freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. The economies of Asia, China included, depend very heavily on Middle Eastern oil. So the spice oil must flow. If Iran were to, their strongest retaliatory measure, their greatest deterrent would be to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, to attack the oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. That would severely impact the global economy. But because the damage would disproportionately fall on China, which is a friendly state, a friendly superpower, they're unlikely to be able to pursue that option. The Iranians, the Israelis, are already hitting. They've moved on to, they're continuing to hit military and political targets in Tehran, but they are also moving on to striking the energy infrastructure of that country. That is a concern for the Chinese. If they go too far in crippling Iranian oil production, that becomes an economic issue for China. And I expect that the form that Chinese intervention will take will be to try to de-escalate and stabilize. Now, there is another possible scenario, which I wouldn't rule out, although that doesn't mean that this is what I'm proposing is the next logical step or the likeliest outcome. But if China thinks that the situation is too far gone, right? There's no stabilizing this, that there will be escalation, that at some point Iran is going to hit a U.S. base or a facility in a way that will compel intensification. And that is going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz and oil exports regardless. It's just inevitable. That may move up their timeline for Taiwan, right? Like, it's go time because the situation is now so unstable that we need to grab what we can. Otherwise, the overall chaos is just going to overtake the entire system anyway, and we'll be in a weaker position. So now's the time to move. Like I said, I'm not proposing that as the likely next step or some kind of inevitable escalation, but that is, I believe, the most likely vector for this to become a global conflict.
Ben Burgis?
It's worth thinking about that. Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like even if that doesn't happen, which probably not, right? But just a full-blown war in Iran, I mean, would I mean, just given the sheer size involved, given the, I mean, sure, it might still be using the Top Gun MiGs, but I mean, it's like they still have much more of a real military than, Saddam Hussein certainly had in 2003, or, never mind the Taliban in 2001. I mean, this does, like, just, if all that happened was what Trump increasingly seems to be lurching towards, which is like full-blown U.S. involvement in a war in Iran, and, zero other countries got involved, I mean, that seems like it would be enough to be catastrophic on a level that would be completely different from either of the Bush-era wars.
On the side of the screen, I have here a picture of the F-5S MiG. Iranian, the Iranian Air Force also has some F-14 Tomcats. I believe the United States does not use the Tomcat anymore. Am I correct with that, Kuba?
Not for any heavy lifting, no.
It's like they do at the air shows.
Yeah, pretty much.
For GI Joe enthusiasts like myself.
Yeah. It's The F-16 still gets some use, but the Tomcat is it's like one of those a Chrysler LeBaron or something. Deep cut.
Friend of show, Toure Reed, is a huge plane nerd, and he'll go down rabbit holes with this stuff. I'm going to tell him that Chrysler LeBaron line, because I've never heard or thought of that. Now, what you guys see is the MiG. Israel has F-35s, which are highly advanced, and they have a very well trained. Look how cool that looks.
Iran has shot down 2 of them.
That's crazy.
Which is 2 more than they had any right to shoot down.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if there's some vulnerability that they're exploiting in the F-35.
I mean, is Iran kind of, another Star Wars metaphor? Are they the rebels here? The scrappy group of, like you said.
I mean, Ayatollahs are kind of like Shia Jedi, right? Except their power is Allah, not the Force.
I was going to say something, but I don't want to. I forgot we're on air right now. But is this even a fair fight?
Oh, what type of idiot fights fair?
It's a great comeback. I mean, should this underscore for people how one-sided Western foreign policy has been in enabling Israel's military dominance?
Oh, I mean, no doubt about that. I mean, they have. I mean, if there's one thing that's just overwhelmingly clear in the last couple of years, I mean, it's that they have a well-founded belief that the sky is the limit, right? As far as what they can get away with, and still have the U.S. U.S. have their back. I mean, this is. I think that. I mean, and to some extent, of course, that's been true for a very long time. But I mean, there's also, there's also a limit. I mean, there's a degree to which, like, some U.S. administrations have yanked on the leash a little bit and pulled Israel back from from some of the provocative things that it does. But I mean, I think that the last year and change of the Biden presidency, as Joe Biden's brains were leaking out through his ears, nose, and mouth. He would like occasionally grumble about what Netanyahu was doing, but it never went beyond that. And the Israelis definitely figured out. It's like, oh no, there's really not going to be like any check at all. I mean, like, even at times when Biden would like be like, oh, we're going to like slow walk one weapon system, because we're mad right now. Like, it never lasted for like more than a few days, and it's and then Trump came in. I mean, this is the other article that I just wrote. Neither of them are out yet, but this is the other article I just wrote about this. That like there are all these people who are like, oh, Trump has betrayed America first with this. This is not what he campaigned on. It's like, yes, it did. Yes, it was. Yeah. Right? Trump said many times during the campaign that Biden had been holding Netanyahu back and that was wrong, right? Not to mention, of course, that Trump is the guy who tore up the original nuclear deal, assassinated Soleimani, etc. Right? So this was always what you were going to get. So it's like, old man Biden wasn't going to do anything to restrain them, and Netanyahu was pretty openly rooting the whole time for Trump to take over, Trump to win the election, because he knew that with Trump, even the grumbling would be gone, right? I mean, the grumbling would be replaced with attaboys, right? So, like, that is definitely a sign that this like, of course, if you know, I mean, if you have this blank check of unconditional support for, you know, this like very belligerent, very militaristic state, I mean, you know, they're gonna, you know, they're gonna push and push and push to see how far they can take that, you know. I mean, so like, I think there's a reason why Netanyahu has been making these claims. Again, the earliest examples, you know, Glenn Greenwald did a video on System Update that's like, it was just a clip that's like 10 minutes of just going through each past instance of Israel or the U.S. issuing dire warnings about an Iranian nuke. And Netanyahu's been saying stuff like this since the early 90s. I mean, the sort of memorable like UN presentation with like what was clearly a picture of a bomb from Looney Tunes that Netanyahu did. That was in 2012, right? You know, he said it's months away, you know, from developing the nuke, right? So it's like the fact that they've been singing this song forever, but like they've just kind of like, the point of singing this song forever was mostly to sort of try to goad the United States into doing something. The fact that Netanyahu feels emboldened to just like, you know, do it himself. And, you know, we I guess we don't know, you know, Trump claims that he was in on it all along. He might be saving face. I've seen reports that Trump gave very mixed signals in advance about whether the Israelis could do this, whatever, right? But like the fact that Netanyahu like felt like he could get away with this now, I mean, is really a sign that like, if it's like now, like any kind of restraints that there ever were are just completely gone.
Trump talks in this very simplistic way that the Marxists would call them petite bourgeois. I call it small businessman, kind of Michael Scott mentality. Like everything's a deal.
Yeah.
This person wants this, they get that. Bing, bang, boom. We're out of here. And it's, you know, it's way more complex. But he likes to talk. I don't want to say talk down. I think that's the only way he understands things. Like I would love to see the notes that he gets so he can have a kind of understanding about things.
In
like
crayon.
Fonts this big, you know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I will say the most recent update, and actually maybe this will be my last contribution. I really should, you know, it's like, oh man, okay, I just finished. I'm still home. I should jump on, right? But I really should get going and, you know, hit the border before the wait time gets too much worse. But but I just saw the most recent update of the New York Times from 40 minutes ago. One of which is called Trump calls for unconditional surrender from Iran, and goes through the Truth Social post about killing the Ayatollah, threatening to do that, and it says that earlier in the day, Mr. Trump said he was looking for something, quote, better than a ceasefire, unquote, between Israel and Iran, quote, a real end, not a ceasefire, unquote. I'm not too much in the mood to negotiate, which is, which is ominous because that's the, you know, I thought Trump's whole brand was that he was always in that mood.
It was pretty gross seeing him kind of act like he was just over it. You know, he leaves the G7 early. I think Macron said that, he was leaving because he said something about negotiation. And Trump comes back, goes, that French bastard has no idea what he's talking about. I left because I left. How did you read that, Kuba? Oh, and Ben, thank you very much. Have a very good one. Drive safe. How did you read that, Kuba? I know you saw that too. I'm just like, fuck this. Like, what? How did that look to you?
I think that Trump has painted himself into a corner with the tariffs and his belligerent foreign policy. He believed that by doing small businessman bullshit, alpha dog dominance games, he could shake some more quarters out of the pockets of his allies and create a more extractive and openly transactional international order. But what's happened instead is that the American allies, the countries that were most invested in the US-led international order, the rules-based international order, have decided to just recreate it around the United States, ring fence the crazies, and redirect the flow of goods and finance so that you can have globalization without the globalizer. And one thing that has happened before in the run-up to the G7 was Canada is joining the European rearmament campaign. They've revived Canada EU free trade agreement, which had been scrapped because of US objections previously. But now that the US is the objectionable one, you can just go ahead and do the thing that they told you couldn't. And countries like South Korea, Australia, Brazil have all redirected some of their most tariff hit exports away from the United States towards Canada. Things like battery technology, things like wind turbines, things like, in the case of Brazil, the one which surprised me the most was the disruption in Canada-US agricultural products has meant that there is now a surplus meat processing capacity in Canada for all of the cattle that aren't coming in from the United States. And at the same time, Brazil can't export cattle to the US because of the Trump tariffs. So instead, those cattle are being sent to Canada to slaughterhouses to be processed into beef, which you can then freeze and store until things get sane enough so that north-south trade can resume, or you can re-export it to bigger markets abroad. And Canada captures the value add, while at the same time preserving that part of its agro-industrial base. Carney is a central banker. He understands international trade and financial dynamics, and he's been very good at seizing these opportunities to sort of redesign the spider's web so that it isn't so monocentric on the United States, the pivotal market anymore. And that's in every one of these countries' interests. So Trump imagined that he could rewrite the international global order and every country would come crawling to him, begging for some kind of deal. The only countries that seem interested in doing that are those that have no other option. The UK being one example. Post-Brexit, Britain has very much struggled to find its place economically in a new international order where it's cut off from Europe. It doesn't have a lot of eager partners. And so it was one of the first states to take up Trump's offer and do a deal. But the other countries are in no rush, which means that an event like the G7 with Japan, Italy, France, Canada, none of these countries being too keen on capitulation is a bit of a waste of time for Trump, right? He's not going to get anywhere with them, especially since they all personally hate him. It can't be fun for him, especially after his awesome, fun time birthday military bash. So get out of that buzzkill zone and, take those toy soldiers and play proper war. That, I think, is the move. And I think that just like he's been, Rasputin, Sith, mind-powered into okaying the Iran strikes by Israel, I think that the hawks in his orbit are like, look, are you really going to let them talk to you like that? Or you just got to show him who's boss. You just got to be willing to escalate, and they'll immediately back down. I don't know how sincere Trump is in demanding unconditional surrender. I think he must realize that that's just not going to happen, right? Like the Iraqis didn't unconditionally surrender. Syria, Bashar al-Assad had to be defeated, right? There was no surrender there either. Iran isn't just going to roll over, but the crayon block print 40-point font notes that he's being given may say the opposite. So I'm very anxious about what he thinks is better than a ceasefire.
There's some people asking questions in the chat about a Brookings Institute paper from 2009 that quote unquote predicted all this, that it would have happened, be it Trump or Kamala, as far as his attack on Iran. I feel like you know that paper.
Yeah, I've looked at it. I haven't thought about it in a minute, but it is one of these. I remember that in the afterglow of the initial invasion of Iraq, the rapid fall of Baghdad, there was this American triumphalism and this sense that we're only just getting started. And the question was like, which country's next? And one of the neocon slogans at that time was, everyone wants to go to Damascus. Real men want to go to Tehran. And regime change in Iran it's not a secret that has been a geopolitical wet dream for the neo-conservative set in both Washington and in Israel. And that paper laid out a number of ways that you could deal with Iran to try to achieve your objectives. And it predicted everything that's happening only in the sense that the paper basically presented every possible scenario. And therefore, anything that happened would have been predicted by that paper. Right?
Got you.
They had, for instance, they had three sort of main sections. One was about negotiations, the Obama approach. One was about color revolutions, people power movements, right? And there was the I think they were calling it the Green Revolution. And there was some hope that some kind of democratic mass mobilization, either within the system in favor of a quote unquote moderate like Khatami, who was a big deal in the early 2000s, or through some people power revolution like the color revolutions, might bring about regime change without requiring military force. And finally, a section about the military option, going into detail about different scenarios that could be brought about, from we do it ourselves to let the Israelis do it to something in the middle. So the paper, I mean, it's good, it's evil, and it's comprehensive, but it's not prescient so much as by being comprehensive, they covered all their bases. And every single one of those alternatives was tried, right? You had the negotiations under Obama, you had the mass mobilization, Americans supported at different points in the last 20 years. And now we're in the conquest and war chapter.
If Trump doesn't rip up the nuclear deal, does this happen, or does this happen regardless?
I think that I think that the nuclear deal that Obama signed could have been an absolute key change in the international relationship with Iran. So if Trump doesn't rip it up, there's potential for a much better outcome. I say potential because the reality is that when I was in Washington, I loved the deal. And I was really curious as to why there wasn't more appetite to revive it in the Biden administration, to return to it now that sort of the temper tantrum was over. And the reality was that Obama, and, you know, I think it's fair to say, not a friend of the show, he was really struggling, and he was kind of heroically pushing uphill on many of his diplomatic efforts, which had the opposition not only of the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party and the pro-Israel wing of the Republican Party and the pro-Israel wing of the Democratic Party, but also what he called the blob, right? The deep state establishment, the people like me.
Mm-hmm.
And he was right. They were wrong. He was trying to do something good, and they were dead set on stopping him. And it wasn't just Iran. It was also countries like Cuba, normalization with Cuba. So even if Trump doesn't win and we have Hillary Clinton, there's no guarantee that between her Saudi and Israeli affinities and the consistent anti-Iranian orientation of a big chunk of the Democratic establishment plus a big chunk of the deep state, you don't have a Democratic president trashing the deal as well, or applying it in such bad faith that it might as well be repudiated. So Obama really failed in many respects, and one of his worst failures was succession planning. We were going to get Hillary Clinton even if we didn't get Trump. And that would have called into question any diplomatic achievements that survived from his administration, regardless.
Well, Kuba, I know it's late where you are. I have another show to prepare for later today in a champagne room after that. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. And I want to bring you back sooner than later for a Polish update show. Can we get that done?
Yeah, let's talk offline. Contact my people. Let's do a deal.
Yeah. It'll be a great Polish show.
It'll be the greatest
everywhere.
The greatest Polish invention since the submarine screen door.
You guys didn't invent pierogies?
If you mean pierogi, yes, but say the word right. Come correct.
Thank you, my brother in Christ.
Thank you, my brother in Allah.
Yes, you just want to make sure this show gets totally taken down. What else can you say? So I'll see you guys later today. Alex Herbert will be back to discuss his reading of Lenin's 45 volumes and where he is in those 45 volumes. And we'll be doing that at 6 p.m. Pacific time. So thank you guys so much. And we are, where's the outro? Out.